got a neighbor down the street who has a Yamaha AC2. So it's an AC golf cart that he wanted to upgrade. It has the old lead acid batteries in it, the Trojan T875s. It's a 48 volt system, but he was looking to upgrade to a lithium pack because his batteries didn't last as long as they once did. In fact, you could only go a few miles on them. So in this video, I'm going to walk you through how I pulled all these old batteries out, how I put in the new lithium pack for him, installed the display up front so that you can track your state of charge, installed a new charge port, and got his range back up to 8 times what he was experiencing with the older batteries. There was an audio issue with this, and I was not here to troubleshoot the audio issue, although I suspect it could have something to do with running the power lines and the signal lines right next to each other. But all that aside, JOSMA sent me this battery. It's a 105 amp hour battery. It's a lithium LiFePO 4 battery, just like all the other installs that I've done on EasyGo. With a ridiculously long warranty and the metal casing, this is one of the most cost-effective batteries I've found on Amazon. In fact, you could replace all of your lead acid batteries for about the same price. It does come with caps to go over the posts that are on there. It comes with this display that shows you the state of charge. You will need to charge it up to 100% the first time you use it, but you can turn off the discharge on this screen itself, and you can turn on and off the charge from here as well. It also comes with a very nice charger. This is a 20 amp charger, which means that on a 110 outlet, it's going to draw about 12 amps. Also means that you need to use a pretty good size extension cord. This charger is mountable in the cart, and that is one of the things that I recommend getting this charger mounted, ordering you a no-co port that you can put in to replace the existing port, and then ordering a nice extension cord, a nice thick extension cord to use to charge these batteries. You don't want to overheat the extension cord when you're plugging that into your outlet to charge and keep it charged. It has plastic on the bottom of it. You're going to want to peel that off before you mount it, and consider that there is a vent on the top of it and heat sinks. So with the fan, you want to make sure that you get plenty of airflow in there so that the charger itself can cool down as it charges your battery up to 58.4 volts from this charger. I have no idea why the top of it's DeWalt yellow, but we'll save that conversation for another day. Let's go ahead and pull the seat off, and then we're going to take our wrench and start loosening all of these nuts for every one of these batteries that are in here. There's 6 8-volt batteries, so there's 2 posts on each battery, and then you're gonna have the connections that go to it, the positive and the negative. They're gonna run back to the solenoid and the AC controller. It's mounted just under the seat on the back side. It's really inaccessible to get to any. I think that's one of the things about the Yamaha is all of the components that actually run the motor, of course, is always in the back near the axle, but the solenoid and the controller are also up under the seat and very hard to access. One of the things that I noticed here for this radio is that there is a 24 volt switch in here that is tapping half of the battery pack. That isn't not likely going to make your pack run out quicker than it would if you were just tapping, 1 or 2 of the batteries to do your 12 volt conversion for your 12 volt accessories. This was literally just for the switch. It's just to light the switch up. I wanted to test the pack voltage and make sure that that was a 24 volt switch, and now I've got another problem because now I have to put in a switch that can handle 48 volts. This switch that's used to turn on and off the radio will 100% fry if you try and put 48 volts on it because it's an automotive switch that's rated for 12 to 24 volts. So I ordered another one of those off of Amazon, and we'll get into installing that later. Not that big of a deal. In theory, you could use any switch you wanted to, but if you want the switch itself to light up, you're going to have to get something that either taps the 12 volts after the buck converter that's in there, or doesn't light up at all, or a 48 volt switch that can use 48 volts to light up, and those are fairly uncommon from what I've been able to tell. I did order a 48 volt switch off of Amazon. It's an LED, and it says it's 48 volts, but I'm a little too nervous to pump 48 volts to it because I don't want to fry the LED on it. So my idea is to wire it up where when the switch is on, it uses 12 volts from the down converter, the DC converter that's mounted in the system, to light the switch up, but run 48 volts through the switch itself, because really you could run a lot of different voltages through that switch and it would be just fine. And I think that's pretty common for how most switches work. If you want to use it all the time, you could wire it to your key switch, but you couldn't turn it off if the cart was running. This is a pretty tedious process to take all of these nuts off, but nowhere near as tedious as lifting each one of these 60, 70 pound batteries out and loading them up to dispose of them is going to be when I have to pull all of these out. Once I've removed these, there's 3 plastic covers covers that come on top. So after I remove all of the 2-gauge serial cables that bring them up to 48 volts, there's these 3 plastic pieces with 3 nuts on here, and I'll take those off to get the remaining batteries out. I had a strap that someone had sent me for a prior conversion that I did, and this makes this job so much easier to pull these batteries out individually and go ahead and load them in the back of the truck. So I pulled all 6 of them out and put them in the back of the truck for a trip to Interstate Battery, which I've covered before. We'll give you some cash for those batteries. Now, I have these mounting plates. These mounting plates didn't come with it. These mounting plates I was sent previously for another job that I had. They were specific for an E-Z-GO golf cart. They don't fit in this tray. I could have cut the mounting plates because the brackets that I've seen that people use for these batteries actually have little lips in the center of them that allow it to go over this existing rib that's down in the bottom, this plastic rib that's down in the bottom of the cage. The thing with this is I could just take any reciprocating saw, go in there and just notch this rib out to allow those brackets to lay flat. One of your options here could be to notch the entire rib out. I was a little worried about structural integrity, but I don't think that's really going to matter. You can notch the entire rib out and then just set the battery down flat in the golf cart. For my purposes, I already had these brackets and it was going to make this job a little bit easier for me. So I put these in, I cut the rib out in the area that I needed to, and then after measuring and spacing out how far out these things needed to go, I think the bolt mount on these mounting brackets is 19 inches across. Once I found out later that the actual bolt mounting distances on the JOSMA battery aren't the same width as the ones that are in these mounting plates, I ended up having to cut the battery in order to mount the battery to these brackets. So what I would recommend is not what I'm doing, not cutting this out and elevating your battery like what I'm doing. I would just cut the entire rib out, set the battery all the way down flat into the cart, making sure that you cut enough room for the battery lip, and then just bolting the battery directly down to the bottom of the plastic tray that's in Another issue that I had was the seat was in the way with the radio in order for me to lift up the back plastic to get back to the solenoid. And the reason I need to get to the solenoid and the controller on this Yamaha AC2 drive golf cart is that the existing battery cables are only long enough to go to the center of the battery compartment. Because of that, the battery connections on lithium batteries are on one end or the other, and you can't turn the battery long ways in the cart. It has to sit sort of parallel to the sides of the golf cart. So you either have connections on the driver's side or the passenger side, not in the back where the original connections were made. So I had to order longer cables. So I ordered a couple of 2-gauge cables. Amazon sent them to me overnight. But that also meant that I needed to get to where the top of the positive connection happens on the solenoid. The solenoid is buried behind the seat underneath this plastic cover, and the controller itself, the AC2 drive controller, is where the negative connects, and I'll show that in a second as I pull those old cables off and put the new cables on. The old cables were 4-gauge cables. I elected to put 2-gauge cables on there, kind of upgrade that a little bit and leave some room in case there was a future upgrade to some of the components in the back in case they wanted to go a little bit faster than, I believe, the 20 miles an hour or so that this cart already goes. I don't think in most cases you'll have to pull this seat out. If you don't have speakers back underneath the seat already, you probably will be able to get to this underneath area. Also, there was a subwoofer and an amp that was mounted in the back too that I would have had to take out if I was going to take out that entire plastic tray to get to it. So ultimately, I just decided to jack up the back of the golf cart and get underneath there to get the cable mounted for the controller. And then I was able to go up under the top of the tray that sits on top of where the seat area is, and get a wrench on top of that to get the positive cable off of the solenoid and replace that and put on my new 2-gauge cables. I'll list these cables, the link to it below so you can order them. They weren't that pricey, but I did order some new cables off of Amazon because I didn't realize the original cables weren't going to reach all the way to the end of the battery. So now we're going to move on to the 48 volt charge port that came with this Yamaha golf cart. we're gonna have to take the original charge port out. I mean, you technically don't have to do this, but if you want to put a no-go port or some other kind of adapter port in there to allow you just to plug an extension cord in without lifting the seat, you can remove this. There's only 3 10mm bolts in here. It's a pretty easy removal. And then 2 of the leads were tied into the batteries, and then there's 1 more lead that you disconnect right here. Once you disconnect that, the whole thing just comes out. Now, unlike E-Z-GO, where you have to run the orange wire over to the positive on the battery so that it knows that it's not charging, this one, you don't have to do anything. All you have to do is unclip that, and you can just leave it and the cart will run. I tested that with once I got the battery in there, I tested it just to make sure that was true, and it did work. So there is the top of the dash. There's just a little clip here that goes in over, I believe, a 3mm Allen wrench bolt. This is the only bolt that holds in the cup holder portion of the top of the dash. It's just a little screw. Once you pull this out, the entire dash can be unclipped. So it's pretty easy to unscrew this, pull it out, and then you can remove this and set it aside so you can get to everything below in the dash area. Now you can see in here, there's an aftermarket marine radio that was added. There's phono connections or audio connections in there and all kinds of stuff. Had to get that out so I could see in there. Now we're gonna finish this port. So I'm putting 3 new screws in here for this NOCO style port adapter that I'm going to put in. This is solid metal, so you have to drill through this. And in my case, I mean, you could use a self-tapping screw or something, but I like to use bolts with lock washers on the back of it so that it never slips out, and make my own holes for it. Pretty easy to slip that in. I'm gonna put each one of these threaded screws in here and then put washers and lock washers and nuts on the back of it. I'm gonna tighten each one of them down individually so that this port has some strength to it. I mean, it's already in metal, unlike, let's say, the E-Z-GO, which is part of the carbon fiber frame. This is literally just a hole cut out. I am sure that there's cleaner ways to do this if you wanted to, you know, recreate that gasket or put some kind of cover. I also thought about putting in like some bushings underneath this to have this less recessed and more flush with the outside of the body. In this case, it really doesn't matter. It might have even gotten in the way a little bit more. So I'm just gonna put all of these screws in, and then I'm gonna put this gasket that used to go around the cover. Now this is virtually pointless at this point. I don't know if it used to keep water out or what the purpose was prior, but I'm gonna put it back in there. There's still space between the plug itself and this gasket that goes around it, but it does give it a little bit of a neater appearance. And right next to that is the old 24-volt switch that is used to turn on the audio system for this golf cart. But we're gonna move over to the battery install. And like I said earlier, I got these mounting plates from a different golf cart install I was doing. These are made specifically for the E-Z-GO battery trays. They're the width of a single battery, and it's meant to lift over the E-Z-GO tray risers because E-Z-GO doesn't have the plastic tub in the bottom of it. So I went and got some 5/16 inch washers and some M8 125 bolts just to use these risers to mount this in the battery tray in this Yamaha golf cart. Unfortunately, they don't fit. I mean, they don't fit with the existing battery holes on the JOSMA battery that I have here. I tried different ways of making them work and ultimately decided that I still wanted to use these risers, but I was gonna have to get out a saw and cut a hole. So first let's check, okay? So it's roughly a little over 12 inches tall with the riser, and the seat depth to the plastic is right around 13 inches. And that was really my concern, is making sure that the seat could still go down with the height of these risers on there. I decided to take my DeWalt trusty bandsaw that I don't know where I've been without this my entire life. This thing's like one of the greatest things ever. Instead of using reciprocating saws or trying some metal blade on a jigsaw or something, these bandsaws are great. A little pricey, but really good. I cut 2 slots in the bottom of the battery, and I was originally going to use some pliers, but I ended up with these needle nose strippers just because they were thin enough to fit in this little ridge. I cut the slot out, and then I used the pliers to go ahead and pull that piece of metal out, and then I used some paint to make sure that that part of the metal base on the battery was never going to rust. Now, 2 of the holes kind of fit. I had to make them a little bit wider for the bolts, so on both sides I cut that out a little bit. I went ahead and test fit with the bolt in there. I stuck the mount on and then used a pencil to draw exactly where the screw hole needed to be on the other side, so I knew where to take my bandsaw and where to cut the hole out on the other side. This is a pretty simple process. I mean, I just got the bandsaw and I cut one high and one low, and then I just took, again, some pliers to bend that back and forth. Probably a better way to do that. Probably could have even drilled a hole through this that would have fit, but this was my quick and easy solution for making this happen. I used the bandsaw, I used the pliers, I bent the tab enough so that I could get a big enough hole in there for the bolt to fit in. I was actually offset a little bit on the first one that I tried putting on here, and I ended up having to cut down just a little bit lower to make it fit. But once I did, well, you can see that it doesn't exactly fit, and I had to cut just a little bit lower. So once I did that, I got a correct fit on it. I put some spray paint on there to make sure that we are in Florida and things rust very easily down here. So I put some spray paint on it after that to make sure that the base of this battery was never going to rust. Everything seemed to fit exactly like I wanted to. So next up was time to go ahead and put these bases in the bottom of the golf cart. But before we do that, I got the vacuum out. I'd love to vacuum these carts out because they're absolutely disgusting. They collect all kinds of stuff over the years. And before you get the battery in there and in the way of everything, it's easier to run this LCD screen cable that you have here. I ran it from underneath the dash all the way underneath the cart. I used zip ties to tie it up underneath the cart and ran it into the battery compartment. Some of those displays will disconnect back behind the display, so you can run the cable either way. In this case, it has to start from the front and go all the way through to the back. But once I had that and all the dry fit stuff in, like the charger and the other pieces, I was able to put the 2 risers in and get the battery slid into place with the bolts that are already in the riser. I gotta tell you, I struggled a little bit with this. I probably should have just tightened these bolts down and put the whole battery in with the riser together. I think that would have made life easier. Once I've done that, I'm going to connect the display. I'm going to go ahead and connect up all the wiring to it that needs to be connected, remembering that your lowest amp draw cables need to go furthest away from the post. So the closest thing to the post, the closest thing to the battery, are these new 2-gauge 5-foot cables that I bought off of Amazon, and then the charger after that, and then any other ancillary connections. They do have to all be facing down and grouped and bunched very tightly if you want to slide the caps on. And I've had problems with caps in the past. These caps seem to fit just fine. They went over the bolts that came with this battery just fine without any snapping in issues, and it was pretty easy to put on and use a wrench to tighten down this post bolt into the battery so that I could get this thing wired up. Because here's going to be the $1 million test. I wasn't sure that, if there was some kind of reed switch wire or something that I needed to connect to make it move, or in another case, we forgot to put the speed sensor back in and the cart didn't move. But in this case, it actually did move. Once I connected it up, turned it on, flipped the tow run switch back, everything started working. The bottom of this tray is plastic. So I used some self-tappers down here to screw into it with some gigantic size washers. I put in 3 bolts on each side of it, and I still don't have the battery itself tightened down, so I'm going to use this 3/8" ratchet from DeWalt. This is part of their Atomic series as well, and I don't think it's 3/8. I think it might be a 1/2" ratchet, but whatever it is, it works really well and saves a ton of time when you're doing stuff like this. Just make sure you thread everything first. I also got the vacuum back in there and got all the metal shavings cleaned up. If you don't do that, those metal shavings can actually rust in the bottom of the tray if water sits in there and cause problems later, so make sure you clean up your mess whenever you're doing that. And get the ratchet going again and go ahead and tighten down these M8 125 bolts that I had. And you can see me test it there to make sure it moves. Now, once I had the display cable run, I ran it through the golf ball holders. The owner of this cart doesn't golf at all and doesn't use those, and he said that would be a fine place to install. I put on the mounting bracket. I made sure that it was recessed far enough from the windshield, but the Yamaha battery meter that's on here doesn't function anymore with the lithium battery. The voltage is probably too high for it to tell what's going on. So ultimately, I just went in there and disconnected the Yamaha meter from the back. One of the last things that I like to do is clean up my mess. I went around with I don't know, dozens of wire ties and tightened everything up, cleaned it all up at the bottom. People may want to store things down in here. I wouldn't recommend storing them on the top of the charger because it blows heat out, but there are other places in there where you might be able to utilize some of that new storage space since we don't have the 6-8 volt batteries in there anymore. So clean up your mess, snip off your ends on all these and leave them with a nice tidy environment once you get done. It makes it easier when you want to come in and troubleshoot later. You're trying to figure out what wire runs to where. You can see it very easily when everything's bundled together. So now that we have the install completely done, it's time to take this guy out for a test run. I took my son with me as we headed out of the neighborhood, punched it straight to the floor to see what kind of top end speed we have, and we're getting a max speed still of about 20 miles an hour. So it didn't speed the cart up any more than what it did on lead acid batteries. In fact, it goes almost exactly the same, but the big difference is going to be in the range that we were getting on the lead acid batteries versus the range on this new LifePo 4 battery from JOSMA. They're virtually all the same at 105 amp hours. When you put this style of battery in, you're probably going to be getting about an equivalent range on it. Fortunately, in the neighborhood, it opens up to 8-foot sidewalks, and we're allowed to drive down the sidewalks as long as we share those sidewalks with pedestrians and make sure that the carts are yielding to pedestrians, as you can see in the sign right there. There's a recommended top speed of 10 miles an hour, I think, on these cart paths. Most people generally are pretty careful as they go down. There goes a pedestrian as we drive by, but we're seeing roughly 19 to 20 miles an hour as we run through the neighborhoods and the stoplights here. We're going to take this out on what was a typical trip for the man who owns this golf cart. He was running out to like a 7-Eleven that was roughly 2.5 miles away. And so one of the things that he's basically said on the lead acid batteries where they were, if he would go to that 7-Eleven and come back, it was a little over 5 miles, that he would be left with almost nothing in the cart, even after charging it 100% and coming back. He was worried that the cart would die on the way back. So it really wasn't getting much range. I think the plates had been let go and not completely kept full of water. And that's one thing that will ruin your lead acid batteries pretty quick, or quicker than the expected life. I've heard of people getting 3 to 5 years on lead acid batteries. Doesn't seem that long, but when you compare that to a lithium, a LifePo 4 battery, where you should be getting 6,000 charge cycles on it, and you're maybe charging once or twice a week, you can see that you would easily be able to get, at least 5 to 10 years out of these. I think there is maybe a 5-year warranty on this battery. Some batteries, the most extreme ones that I've seen, come with a 10-year warranty. This neighborhood is set up for golf carts. That's why you see things like tunnels that go under roads to allow cart traffic to go by. So we're going through this tunnel. We're going through right by a recreational park on the way to get to the 7-Eleven over here. I can say that on these golf carts where I've done these lithium swaps, we're shedding 200 to 300 pounds on each one of these. So you're going to get more range just from having less weight. This is my first AC drive golf cart, so the first one that I've done that has an AC controller in it and an AC motor. But I've done a 100 amp hour battery, I've done a 160 amp hour battery, I've done 4 individual 30 amp hour batteries, all in an E-Z-Go. I've done an E-Z-Go RXV, I've done a Cushman golf cart, and now I've finally done a Yamaha golf cart. So let me know what kind of golf cart upgrades you guys would like to see in the future, and I'll see if I can get some of those scheduled for us. Before I jump into the final analysis and the full range that this battery is capable of, I just want to tell you that I got this battery from JOSMA, and they are linked down below if you'd like to pick up your own. Doing that helps support the channel a little bit. Giving us a like and subscribe will also help us support the channel some. I've also added Amazon links for all the parts and pieces that I had to buy, and in the YouTube shopping links on the video, you'll find links to some of the DeWalt tools that are available as well. In the end, I did a shade over 5.5 miles, and I looked at the display and it had 89% left, which means I could get somewhere north of 40 miles, but probably less than 50 miles total on this. I'm going to go ahead and back this out and take it back over to the neighbor's house and let him know that his lead acid to lithium conversion has been done. And I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you'd like to see on the next one, and I'll take care of it. Thanks for watching.